Okay. Hi, Saeed. I'm glad you're here. Feel free at any time to come off of mute or show your face on camera. We'd love to connect with you. If you're in the place to do that, you're welcome to. Awesome, awesome. All right, so everybody's popping in here. This is so great. It's great to see you. Everybody's getting your tech ready. Yes, yes. Okay. Hey, Beth. Nice to see you. Hi, hi. Okay, Saeed, Iris, Betsy, Beth. Great, got everybody. Betsy, you're also welcome to come off mute and on camera at any time to interact. A couple new names in the house today, which is super exciting. I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy that you're here. I'm Gina. If I haven't yet said hello to you directly, I'm Gina Schatz. I'm the developer of the Schatz Method, and I'm hosting our hour of training today, which I'm super excited about. It's like my favorite thing to do on Tuesdays. I mean, I'm torn on a couple other things, but and it's all anatomy related, but I really do love coming in and talking anatomy with you guys on Tuesdays. So thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. My intention for today is to pour into you. Usually what we do is I teach for, maybe half of our time together, 20 to 30 minutes on something that I've prearranged. And then we open up for hot seats. So again, for those of you who haven't been here yet and aren't used to being on camera or off mute, please feel free to do that, because at the halfway mark of our time together today, I'm here to answer all your questions. And the questions are so amazing. You guys are so smart and doing such good work out in the world that every time a practitioner comes in and asks a question, it opens up a greater dialogue. So please feel free to come in and ask questions. So Iris, I know you've been here the last few weeks. I'm so glad that you're here again. We are continuing our conversation, picking up from where we left off last week on the lever system. And we're going to talk today a little bit about how synergists in reciprocal inhibition can create pain, can be causal to pain. If everything I just said sounds exactly up your alley, awesome. It's going to be a great time. And if everything I just said is kind of like, what did she just say? Then I'm super glad that you're here, because I want you to know this, especially if you're navigating pain. Again, if I haven't had a chance to interact with you directly, I just want to reiterate, because I say this every week. Whether you're here as a movement or a manual practitioner, it's all good, because I'm both. And I believe that both are necessary, and certainly a yoking between the two is necessary to get folks out of pain. The lane that I'm in is navigating pain, preventing it for sure, eradicating it, and avoiding it if we can do that. And most of the time we can do that. The avoiding the pain is oftentimes more about knowing anatomy, knowing functional anatomy and how we're designed and how to generate that design in movement. And when we're manual practitioners, we still want to know what the movement is so that we know what the genesis of the pain is that we continue to work out manually. So we don't want to get into a Groundhog's Day situation where we're over and over and over again treating the same symptoms. We want to address it from the functional place. And when we're healing injuries, believe it or not, it's not as complicated as some of us fear at first. When we're healing injuries, one of the ways to do that is to get the body back into moving the way it is optimally designed to move. And when we're injured, or when our clients or students are injured, we sometimes mistakenly think that we're no longer able to move that way. And that's not true. We never lose the ability to move back into our function. What we lose is our pain-free path back into optimal function. So what we want to do is navigate those waters as delicately as we can to get folks back into moving functionally, optimally. So we need to know what the functional movement is and how to return them to that place. And in doing that, most of our pain goes away. So that's also a great recipe. We'll talk more about navigating pain and injuries in weeks to come. This week, what I promised is that we would continue on our conversation around reciprocal inhibition, and specifically how muscles of reciprocal inhibition can contribute to pain. Last week, we talked about the lever system. The lever system is inside of reciprocal inhibition. Anybody here know what reciprocal inhibition is? Beth, I know you do, and I'm totally putting you on the spot by calling you on that. Does anyone else, in addition to Beth, know what reciprocal inhibition is? It's okay if the answer is no. I want to know what you know so that I can fill in the gaps for you and we can all be in the same conversation together. Anyone here? I know a couple other people popped in. Let's see who's here. Ron, I'm glad you're here. Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to chime in anytime. You can use the chat if you don't want to come off camera, and also come off camera and off mute too. At any time, that's for everybody. Okay, reciprocal inhibition. If I talk about reciprocal inhibition and I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, I would be talking at you instead of with you, and that makes me sad. So, reciprocal inhibition, should we review? Would a review of reciprocal inhibition serve you? Anybody? Anybody? Okay, well, I'm going to do it because I'm not sure where you're at. Here's the thing, guys. I'm here for you for this hour, and it would serve me to be in service to you. Hi, Joan. I'm glad you made it in. So if you want to show up for our connected conversation in any form, that really works for me, because then I know how to serve you. I don't need you to be here for me. I want to be here. I need to be here for you. So let me know where you're at. Hey, Ron, you came off camera. I'm so happy to see you. Is this you're muted, Ron, so I can't quite hear you. Is this your first week here? I feel like I've
Yes,
seen your name
is.
before.
Yes, it is.
Oh, welcome. I'm so glad that you made it. There's so many new folks today. I guess it's like the start of a new month. So there's like a new crew that's showing up today, which is amazing. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here. Ron, I'm totally putting you on the spot. Do you have a running dialogue, a running knowledge around reciprocal inhibition?
No, I do not.
Okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know that, because now I know how to serve. Perfect. So let's do a mini review on reciprocal inhibition. And the reason I say mini is because it takes a bit to get a full understanding of this concept in functional movement. And the reason I want you to have it is because it is a base of functional movement. So as we're navigating pain and injuries and optimal movement, we want to know, how do we function? Reciprocal inhibition is one of the ways that we function, from muscles to joint action. If there is a desire for you to know all of the whereabouts of reciprocal inhibition, I can completely support you in that. I have several courses where we outline it and practice it and implement it. For today, the base of our knowledge of reciprocal inhibition, if all you knew was this would work. A main muscle does the movement, does the action, and the action is always contraction. A main muscle responds to that main action by lengthening. So the main action is contraction. We talked about that a few weeks ago in our Tuesday training. Those replays are still up on the YouTube channel. Feel free to go back and review them if that would support you. The main action is contraction, not stretch. Stretching doesn't exist, which we talked about last week and the week before. The main muscle that responds to contraction does lengthen, though, what we would formally call stretching. And that is another contender in reciprocal inhibition. In addition to the main guy who does the main action, which is contraction, that main guy has helper bees that help him do that action. And then there are muscles around a joint, because that's where the action happens. There are muscles around a joint that stabilize that joint to allow that movement to occur safely. So it sounds like the synergists, or excuse me, it sounds like the stabilizers are the ones that generate all the safe action. That's actually not true. It's the balance and the orchestra between all these muscles in reciprocal inhibition that allow the movement to be safe. They each have a really important role. How's that, Ron, for a brief overview?
Sounds okay to me.
Making sense? Okay, great. And everybody else, if you want to communicate with me in the chat, that would be great too. Let me know if that's a working definition that you can play with for the rest of our time together today. If so, then we're off to a great start. Okay, so we've got our 4 categories of muscles that show up in reciprocal inhibition: the main guy that contracts, the main guy that lengthens in response, the guys that help, and the guys that stabilize. Okay, cool. When we have knowledge of each of the muscles that does that job, and now we're back to muscle ID, which we talked about, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. When we have a running knowledge of which muscles, okay, Iris, awesome, I'm glad that's working for you. When we have a running knowledge of which muscles do play that part in reciprocal inhibition, now we can start putting together really effective treatment plans for not only identifying what needs to happen, but also identifying what might not be happening that should be happening. And when we get into that territory of what isn't happening that should be happening, we're definitely in the land of injuries, preventing them, rehabbing them, and the like. So when we spoke about stretching, and that stretching doesn't exist, and that it's the muscle that's contracting that's doing the action, that's amazing. Today, we layered on in reciprocal inhibition that the main guy who's doing the action has a slew of helper bees that help him do that job. And here's where things get dicey. When we know the main action at a joint and the muscle that does the action, we can target proper function. Perfect. When that main guy is in duress and is not doing his job, someone else jumps in to do the job. Usually someone who's assigned to help out to do the job. I've said what I'm about to say 1,000 times, and I will continue to say it. When those helper bees are assigned the main role of the president of the company, they are not skilled to do that fully forever. And that's when the body generates an injury. And injuries can look like lots of different things. An injury can look like pain, like I can't move my limb because this hurts. It can also look like repetitive tightness. And I say that in air quotes because we've talked about the idea that there are several different types of tightness. When someone shows up with tightness and restrictions to you as a manual practitioner and you release that tightness, if the tightness is generated from a group of muscles that are jumping in to do someone else's job, it will continue to be Groundhog's Day, and the body will repeat itself into that dysfunctional pattern of tightness that you're releasing and tightness that you're releasing. The great news as a manual practitioner is that you're releasing it. The not so great news is that that repetitive cycle of functional patterns that generate tightness and then you releasing it, and then functional patterns that generate tightness and then you releasing it, that in itself creates instability in the body that destabilizes the function. So what we really want to do, rather than keep releasing symptoms, and I would point yoga teachers in this direction too, rather than just keep lengthening and releasing tension in the body, what we really want to do is find out why it's starting in the first place. And why it's starting in the first place is based on this concept of reciprocal inhibition. If we can understand who the players are in reciprocal inhibition and identify them as actual muscles that do a job, then we're in a safe place to be able to remedy a potential problem area. Okay, Missy, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Okay, great. So let's give a real life example. Would that support you? A real life example on like what exactly am I freaking talking about? Okay, great, because that also usually works. All right, great. So we've talked about hyperextension of the hip for a couple weeks in a row, and I'm going to continue up with that here, even though I know many of you are here for the first time. Great. That means that if this conversation matters to you and you really want to know more, when you go back and watch the replays from last week and the week before, this will all be like one running story. It'll be like you didn't miss a thing. Isn't that so exciting? Okay, cool. So yeah, I think so too. Okay, so we're going to talk about hyperextension of the hip. In some instances, we would refer to it as extension. It is almost an interchangeable term when we talk about extension and hyperextension of the hip, and we did talk about that weeks ago. So I don't want to continue to beat that drum, but it depends on where our starting point is. For our conversation today, when we are standing side view, this is Murph, by the way, who those of you who haven't met Murph, this is Murph. This is our teaching assistant for all of our practices. When we're coming from a neutral standing position, side facing, and we step our leg back, the action is not happening in the leg, it's happening in the hip, and it's happening right here in the femur and acetabulum juncture, and that we're calling hyperextension of the hip. Who remembers what main muscle creates that action? We've talked about it now for a couple weeks. Who knows the main muscle? Beth, you're quiet today like crickets, and I know you know it. You got to be sitting on it and ready to explode. The main muscle. What's that?
Glute max.
Thanks, Beth. Glute max is the main muscle that does hyperextension of the hip. Exactly. This main rump shaker. Who knows what muscles help glute max do that action? The Jeopardy music's playing again. I really should get a recording of that. Who knows who helps glute max do hyperextension of the hip? Okay, let's pause here. This is really exciting because couple ways that we know where we want to learn next. I know all of you are here to continue your learning. That's why you're here learning with me, which I love. I adore you for that. Here's where we know where we want to learn next. If we're not quite sure what joint actions are yet, we really want to know joint actions. Because if we know joint actions, then we know where the movement's occurring in the body and we can ID a muscle. Just knowing the names of muscles, but not knowing where they are in joint action separates joint action from muscle ID, and that doesn't serve. So whether you're a manual or movement practitioner, if that's where you're at right now, perfect. That's dog-ear that. That's where you want to go next. If you do know the joint actions and you're not quite sure yet, oh shit, what muscle does that action? Great, go into muscle ID. Muscle ID from movement though, right? So for those of you who are manual practitioners, I also started as a manual practitioner, and I learned muscles for hundreds and hundreds of hours, but I didn't know how they moved. So that didn't really support me when I was trying to restore function, which is what I'm appealing to you all to do today. So learning muscles in their movement is the next place that you want to go. So just check and dog-ear that place. That's great. Of course, I know all these things are important as well. So I've created courses to support you that way. And if you do know what muscles do the action, but you're not quite clear on the whole concert of muscles that do the action, but you're navigating pain, that's where you want to go next. Because the whole concert of muscles that create the entirety of the movement are what you want to look at when you're avoiding or restoring function from pain. Because it's often not just the main guy that does the joint action when we're navigating pain that we need to look at. It's usually the concert, which is what leads us right back into where we were today at the beginning of our talk on reciprocal inhibition. The reciprocal inhibition is the concert of muscles that are doing an action, okay? So continuing on with our real life example, hyperextension of the hip looks like this. Glute max is the main guy that does that action, and the hamstrings support that. The hamstrings support that. So that would be filling in the players of our concert of action in reciprocal inhibition. Here's why that matters when we're navigating pain. If glute max is not doing 100% of its capable job, and we've talked for a few weeks now on how that is highly likely on most people because we sit on it all day in a lengthened position. So if glute max is not functioning, showing up at 110%, or let's just call it 100%, glute max is not showing up at 100% to do its job. But we have hyperextension of the hip happening every single step we take, because we do. That's the joint action, one of the joint actions that happens in gait. As you're walking to the bathroom to brush your teeth, you're using glute max to create hyperextension of the hip. Unless glute max isn't showing up, now it'll lean on the body, will do any movement you ask it to do, even at risk of doing it from a dysfunctional place, meaning outside of optimal function. So it will now lean on the helper bees, the guys that help do hyperextension of the hip, which is now hamstrings. So for those of us who are teaching movement or doing manual work, how many of us have clients and students who come in with tight hamstrings? So guess what? We stretch our hamstrings and we manually release our hamstrings. And now we're in a perpetual loop of Groundhog's Day, because that's not the problem area. That is the symptom of the problem. And now we've created that get tight in function and then release it in the modality that we do, and then get tight in function and then release it in the modality we do. And we create that instability that I talked about earlier without restoring the function. And now we on our own can be contributing to creating pain for folks. And I know that's not the business we're here to do. So I hope that I have appealed to you in knowing joint action, knowing muscles that do that joint action, and now leaning into reciprocal inhibition and learning muscles in movement so that we can be the ones to avert pain and heal and restore function rather than be the cause of that pain, that we're here to actually be in service to the opposite. Yeah. Does that make sense? that supporting you? Thumbs up? Okay, awesome. Yay, perfect. Okay, so over to you. What questions did that generate for you? Or what questions did you come here with, or both? I'm here for several more minutes, so I've got space to answer all your questions. What's on your mind?
How do you strengthen the glutes to take over their job? And
Oh, that's a
relieve the
great,
hamstrings?
say the last part, Ron?
Well, you wanted to relieve the hamstrings from overwork, right?
Yes,
So you want to strengthen your glutes.
you do.
Okay.
So your question is, how do you do that?
Well, what's the best way to do that and relieve the hamstrings at the same time?
Well, strengthening glute max in its function of hyperextension of the hip will alleviate hamstrings. So you get like 2 candles with 1 flame.
Okay.
So I'm going to turn that back to you, Ron. What do you know about strengthening muscles? How does one go about strengthening a muscle? What's the formula?
Well, usually it's, some repetitive action under resistance.
Yeah, which action? Love it. Which action?
Well, I guess in this case, you want to move your leg back, your thigh, rotate it backwards.
So yeah, so it's definitely in moving the thigh. It's not rotation though, because rotation of the thigh is actually rotation in the hip. And now we're engaging deep six.
Okay, I meant to swing it backwards.
Yeah. So what you're bringing up, Ron, is exactly what we talked about a few weeks ago, which is our starting point. It's the first go around in the applied anatomy principles guide that I put together.
Okay.
When we know the joint action first, that is our starting. We need to know that. We need to know what the joint action is so that we know what the movement looks like. Is it the leg moving backward? Is it the leg rotating backward? Is it the leg going forward? Is it the knee bending? What is it? What is the joint action? If we can start there, then we can start IDing what muscle does that action. And then we can start finding out its synergists and what to do with that muscle. We can also, what you just brought up for us, Ron, we can also ID if the muscle isn't doing the job. The only way we can do that though is if we know the joint action. We must know the joint action to be able to go to all the other steps.
Okay.
Yeah. Ron, did you get the anatomy guide by chance? Did you already download that?
I just downloaded it, but I haven't read it. Okay,
perfect. So when you get a chance to have a look at that, I'm so glad you have it. And everybody that's here, I want you to have that I created it with you in mind. And I'm not the most graphic person, but I think it's pretty. So I'm very proud of that body of work. But really it's to keep it visually appealing so that you dive into the material. In that guide, Ron, and I just put it in the chat for everybody here too, and I'll put it in the comments under the video as we post on the YouTube channel. In that guide, we talk about knowing what the joint action is and being so clear about that when our client moves, we know if they are going into hyperextension of the hip or if they're creating some lateral rotation while they're doing that. If they're creating lateral rotation while they're doing that, we can't get to glute max fully because now we have another joint action that we've stacked on top that involves other muscles. Main muscle that does their job, synergist muscle that does its job, and antagonists that allow the job to happen. And that's the reciprocal inhibition conversation we're on right now. Reciprocal inhibition is useless if you don't know what joint action. So knowing joint action is really, really helpful because it gets us laser clear on exactly what we're targeting. So continuing with this conversation, Ron, I saw you muted, but we have one more step to go. So when you do know that it's glute max that you want to strengthen, and you know that it's hyperextension of the hip with no rotation, what's the formula for strengthening muscles? And the formula would come right from our knowledge of our physiology. You want to take a go at it, Ron? What's the formula for strengthening muscles? Oops, you're muted. You want to unmute? Tell me what you're coming up with. I'm sure it's perfect. Oh, unmute. Oops, still muted. So on the bottom left of your screen, there'll be a microphone. Just tap on that. There should be a red line and there you go.
Okay.
There
No,
you go.
I made enough comments already. Displayed all my ignorance so far.
Oh, no, that's not true. You helped us know where we're all at. I'm sure there's other folks in this conversation who are like, thank goodness we're talking about this.
Okay.
Go ahead. What's our formula? What does our physiology tell us about contracting and strengthening muscles?
Well, generally you just have to actuate that muscle, make it contract under some resistance and do it in a repetitive way to strengthen it.
That's right. That's right. Ron, tell me just for context, are you a manual or movement practitioner?
Pardon me?
Tell me for context, are you a manual or movement practitioner?
I'm a manual. I'm just a practitioner.
Yeah, what do you do? What's your title?
I don't really have a time. I'm just a student, I guess you could say, to be honest with you.
Okay. Are you a student of what? Are you massage therapy?
No, mostly Ashtanga yoga.
You're a yogi.
Right.
Okay, so that's movement.
Right.
Massage therapy would be manual and yoga would be movement.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No worries. So we're here talking, we all movement and manual practitioners meet together, but it's interesting to identify what we do because manual practitioners like massage therapists know all the muscles and not necessarily how they move because the work that they do is passive. Yoga teachers learn movement, but not necessarily what muscle's responsible. So they're not sure if they're actually generating healing in function or creating restrictions. And we're all in it together. So that's why we keep meeting every week, because we're all in it together. So what we know about muscles, the way muscles work in our physiology is that the way they contract is moving insertion towards origin in their joint action. So again, we got to know the joint action, got to know the muscle that's doing the job, and then move its insertion towards its origin in its joint action. And that will generate strengthening a muscle. So that is the full answer to your question, Ron. How do you strengthen glute max? I do a lot of answering questions with questions because I want you guys to think and know and be powerful and all the good stuff. Awesome, Ron. Did that answer your question fully?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Beth, I saw you were up next.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm here today as somebody who is injured. I injured my knee on Thursday. And I saw an orthopedic doctor. I'm going to get an MRI after we close here. I know we've talked before about compensatory patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of fear associated with this injury. And I know we've talked about that too, and pain hijacking one's brain. So I'm here to get a little support around being mindful with this injury and noticing compensatory patterns. I'm imagining that some of that is a little bit normal, and then at a point that needs to shift, like a limp and things like that. So because I don't have a diagnosis at this point, I know there's a little more ambiguity, but just curious about what you think about compensatory patterns and injury, and when those are in service to us and when they are not.
Well, first of all, I'm super sad to hear that you're injured. I don't like when people are injured. It's literally what I'm here to create the opposite in my whole life. And because of that, I know that whatever's happening for you right now symptomatically is not permanent. Doesn't mean that that takes away your pain or your fear. But the end is not, this is not the end, right? The symptoms that you're experiencing right now, this is not where the story ends. I promise you that. So all that you mentioned about nervous system and self-care and keeping yourself in a parasympathetic state and just really being loving and nurturing is exactly what's on the docket for the near term for you. And I would say that to any client. And this is not where your story ends. I do know that. I've been around this block long enough. Nobody ended where they started, in pain. Without a diagnosis, I can't tell you specifically anything that I would do for you. And even with a diagnosis, and that goes for everyone that's here, please feel free to bring me all of your client questions. And I can't answer directly what you should do because I can't navigate treatment plans over the internet unless you're a client of mine. That said, Beth, your question sounded more around what I heard was wanting clarity around whether or not compensation is something you should also be focusing your attention on right now while you're still looking for a diagnosis. That there was some fear around compensation. Is that right?
Well, there's fear around the diagnosis. If it's positive, I will have a torn left meniscus. Hopefully not. I don't have clicking. I don't have any sticking. There were 3 things. But there was a pretty loud pop when the injury happened, which was frightening. And sorry about that. There's fear around being injured and the whole process, but I'm trying to breathe and get in my prefrontal cortex as much as possible. And I notice that I'm putting a lot more weight on the right leg, which is probably pretty normal for right now. But yeah, just thinking about how to avoid a compensatory pattern as much as possible.
Yeah. Well, again, even if your test results confirm that you have a torn left meniscus, I've had lots of clients with torn meniscus that have had a full recovery. Okay. In fact, I've not had anyone with a torn meniscus who didn't recover. Great. The way we recover is based on lots of things, and you're being really thoughtful about it. So know that you have everything that you need to heal, and you're a practitioner. So I don't know if this supports you, but I've had some pretty hellacious injuries in my body in the years that I've been on this planet, and every one of them made me a better practitioner. Every one of them. And I'm healed from them too. Like it's a story. It's not my current. So there could be gold in here for you. And I'm not doing anything like spiritual bypassing your current pain and happy grab-assing the state that you're in by any means. Those gifts, if they are there for you, will be revealed in the future. They don't come in the moment of injury. So the point is, be with your injury, be with it, explore it in your body, and then take that with you into your healing, because I do know that you'll heal. And to answer your question about compensation, there's no way to prevent compensation when you're injured. And that's actually a blessing. So we've used compensation lots and lots and lots. And I know you've trained with me before, Beth. We've used compensation as like a do not do, right? And try to pattern interrupt. And that is, I still believe that. That is still my philosophy for people who are not currently navigating an injury. So we can create compensation from just being lazy. Like we talked with Ron's question, like just sitting on our bum all day and lengthening our glute max and then not having full access to it. That's compensation. If I'm leaning on my synergist to create hyperextension of the hip, that's from laziness. That's not because something's like creating, level 10 pain, inflammation, redness, swelling, the whole bit, which is, probable when you have a severe injury, like especially in a tight capsule like the knee. So compensation when we have an injury like what you're navigating is our friend, right? Can you imagine if every time we had an ache, I'm not even talking about like something that needs to be MRI'd to make sure that it's, what level we need to navigate this. I'm just talking about like an ache. How many times you get up in the morning and you're achy? or get up from your computer after sitting there for 4 hours and you're achy, or get out of the car after a long trek somewhere and you're achy. What if every time we were achy, we didn't have compensation and we just stopped walking? That would suck, right? Like, yeah. So we want to have the ability to keep going. And so in that way, compensation is our friend, right? You're still able to do whatever you want to do. You can walk to the bathroom right now and brush your teeth, even with something that is so painful that you're getting an MRI for it. So if you can turn your gratitude towards your compensation in the moment, that will actually help your healing. And that's part of navigating your nervous system, right? We don't need to make matters worse. We don't need to be our own bully. We don't need to be in resistance to what's going on, especially when it's a knee injury, right? Knee injuries, that energy anatomy around knee injuries is all about fear of change and ego and, you know, the energy that comes with that. So we definitely don't want to be in resistance in any injury, and certainly not in a knee injury. Let it be your friend. Be grateful that you can hobble to the bathroom to pee.
Yep.
Right. And then later, when you're able to bear weight on that knee because it's going to heal, then you'll unwrap those compensation patterns. And you'll unwrap those compensation patterns with the bodywork knowledge that you have and with practitioners who are skilled to do that.
Got it. Thank you.
It's totally going to happen. And I happen to know lots of good practitioners. I've trained a lot of them, so I will happily send you to someone who will support you.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
And please, will you send me an email later after your MRI and let me know what the results are?
Okay.
Fabulous.
Will do.
You got this, Beth.
Thanks.
It's not the way the story ends. It's just a chapter.
Thank you.
Okay, loves. Who else has a question for me? Anybody here? A few people just came in, so welcome. I didn't address you specifically. Brittany, I think it was you that came in. Laura, I think it was you. Mylin also came in. I'm glad that you're all here. We are in the hot seating Q&A portion of today's training. If you have any questions about anatomy or muscles or your own body or client work, please allow me to serve you. Just unmute or type your question in the chat. Any questions? You guys are super quiet today. Super quiet today. We had so many questions the last few weeks. Hey, Ron, you got another one?
Yeah, when you were talking about Beth's injury, I mean, I've had injured knees myself. What do you mean by healing? I mean, I basically had surgical intervention and my knees have been fine. When you say healing, does that mean not strictly healing yourself without any intervention or what?
Well, I think healing comes in lots of different forms. So what's your question specifically? That you didn't heal because you had surgery, or I meant, what was your question specifically?
No, I did heal because I had arthroscopic surgery and it took the chips out and my knee was no longer painful.
Yeah. Rockstar. See, that wasn't the end of your story. Your healing is the end of your story.
Right, right. Well, I wanted to know if you meant by healing that it had nothing to do with any other intervention, that your body would just heal itself.
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking, Ron, but let me elaborate on what I think I'm hearing. The body doesn't function in a bubble, and the body is designed to move. So even if we just talk about moving to generate healing, movement is the intervention.
Okay, all right. I mean, in my case, I tried different things, exercises and being careful for, 6 months or a year. And I finally had to have arthroscopic surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And then that took care of it.
Yeah.
So the body I couldn't heal myself. I had to have some intervention.
Some bodies can, and some bodies need intervention. And what I'm hearing you say is that you waited to try other things first before having your body surgically intervened with. I'm ending sentences with prepositions. It does not, not working. Yeah. So I have clients that have surgery as well before they come to me. Sometimes surgery is the answer and it works and everything's great. Sometimes surgery is not the answer and the pain is still there. Sometimes surgery is not needed, but the intervention of functional mechanics is what's needed. And that's not ever actually administered to the body. So then the body has no choice but then to have surgery. I don't know where you were because I didn't see your body, but what I do know is that I have just as many clients who have averted surgery from changing their function as I've had clients who were told that they needed surgery beforehand.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just wanted to know if you basically were against surgery almost totally or something like that.
Well, that's too general of a statement for me to make a comment about that. I mean,
well, it sounds like you understand that in certain situations, surgery can be the answer. In certain situations, it's not.
Yep, that is my philosophy. Absolutely.
All right.
So, for example, I don't do surgery, so I'm not here to speak about that. And I don't think any of us should speak outside of our lane. But I do know that I've had clients who have been diagnosed with a torn meniscus, and depending on the degree of tear and that person's mechanics, it healed on its own. Okay. And I have other clients who've had torn meniscus to whatever degree, I don't know, because I didn't run the MRI, and they needed surgical intervention. Okay. And I know other clients who've had surgical intervention on other things, and it didn't get rid of the pain because the pain wasn't the need to have surgery. When something's torn or broken, I think surgical stitching where it's needed can be really supportive. But just to have surgery around something that's painful, surgery is not a solution for pain. Movement is a solution for pain, but it needs to be functional movement. And that's really the game that we're here to play.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Anything else coming up? Iris?
Just a comment that even after a surgical intervention, rehab is necessary to restore correct function.
1,000% agree with you. 1,000% for a lot of reasons. One, because as Beth is already mentioning, before even having a diagnosis, and we don't even know if surgery is needed, but before even having a diagnosis, we already have compensation. So there's got to be something that rehabs that function, because the longer you do something, the more you have a pattern in your brain, and now that becomes the pattern of how to walk, hobbling, right? So we know that there needs to be intervention for that, for sure. And in the cases where surgery is the next step, the body reacts to that like trauma.
It is trauma.
It is trauma, right? You're cutting through tissues, and those tissues are alive, and those tissues are going and pulling back and freaking out. And so that's needed. That's a means to an end in some cases, like you brought up, Ron. Sometimes that's a means to an end, and we need that. And what happened to all the other tissues that got to be in the way of that fix? They get to be addressed. And then there's also the compensation pattern that happens at the end of an injury, whether it be surgically addressed or just at the end. The compensation patterns change then. So now you have compensation patterns layered on top of compensation patterns, and those have to be addressed. They have to be, because there's no joint function all the way up the chain that's working organically and optimally when you have compensation patterns, and definitely not when they're stacked. Now the brain's confused. So we've got to repattern the body back to optimal function and hold it there, and then regain strength in any tissue that hasn't been used for a while it's been on hiatus healing. That's normal. It should be. When folks have, boots on their legs, or, casts, or they're on crutches, or something happens where they can't use a limb, an extremity, oftentimes what I hear first from them is, the muscles in this leg are so much different than the muscles in that leg, as if it's a problem, as if that's like a way to be like self-critical. And the point is, like, thank God that you gave them a break and that you had another leg to hop around on. So yeah, we do need to create balance in the body. We talked about that last week and the week before. It is imperative that we regain strength in those muscles that were on break for a while. Atrophy begins within 24 hours. And sometimes that's needed to give the joint, like in your case, Beth, in a knee joint, we need to give the joint a break, which means the muscles that create movement at that joint are not going to be working. The atrophy process will begin within 24 hours. We get to address that and bring that body back to balance when it's capable of having joint action. So all those reasons, Iris, yes, thank you for presencing that for us. The body does get to be addressed after the injury, for sure. And that's in our wheelhouse, guys. That's what we're here to do. Look at all the juice you brought us, Beth. Right? One question and we get to learn from you. Any other questions that I can support you around today while we're here together? No, pretty thoughtful today. I think we're all wishing Beth for you to have the best outcome. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't venture any guesses, but I will say that of all the joints that create responses, the knee is the loudest. And I think it's because it's a hinge joint that gets torqued. And so there's just noise that comes with it. But yeah, I've had my own knee sounds and they don't sound like any other joint in the body. So I can almost feel what that was like for you to hear that sound. But don't let that haunt you. It's just the joint telling you, yo, I need some support here. And that's what you're doing. You're giving it support. So keep us posted, okay? All right, loves. Any other questions before we wrap up for today? Anything on anyone's mind? Okay, great. Well, I'm super delighted that you showed up again today. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I love that you were here. Please feel free to join us again next week. I will continue to send out reminder emails for you so that we can all know what channel we're on. Same station, same channel, same time, to the best of my ability. We're going to meet through November, even the week of Thanksgiving, for those of you who asked. And the replays are available on the YouTube channel. We keep them up for about 2 weeks. So you're welcome to go back and review anything that you learned. And please feel free to take the advantage of the anatomy guide and let me know if you have any questions on that. Iris, it looks like you're sending me a love letter as we speak. Are you sending me a love letter? Unmute. Tell me what's up. I don't want to hang up on you while you're typing.
Okay, I won't type that. I was just saying that I love your insightfulness and your way of dealing with people. Thank you.
Oh, Iris, that's such beautiful feedback. Thank you. I received that. I appreciate you. And I'm so glad that you're here. Okay, loves. Well, thank you so much again for showing up. I will look forward with bated breath to our meeting next Tuesday so I can pour into you again. Please bring all of your questions with you. We're going to talk more about compensation patterns and what to do with that. We also had some questions come up around intrinsic versus phasic muscle actions. So again, we're up to function here and anything that is related to function. When you come on Tuesdays, feel free to bring any questions, even if it's not related specifically to what we're talking about that week. So just want to let you know it's open Q&A. Anyone can be on the hot seat. Laura, intrinsics, looking forward to it. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for planting that seed to let me know that would be something great for us to continue our conversation on Tuesdays. Okay, my loves, I will look forward to seeing you next week. I think I've said that now 3 times. Continue to do great work out there in the world. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.